Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to say good morning, even though I don't know what time of day it is, when and where you are listening to this, because it is morning here, as I normally record these in the morning. But good day or good evening to you, if you're listening to this. I'm going to talk about a spiritual truth, and that... what an inflated sense of ego I have to be talking about spiritual truth. But I'm going to talk about it. I'm not going to give you spiritual truth. I'm not going to define, and it'll be made clear as we go on this morning. I am not going to present myself as the arbiter of spiritual truth. That would be hubris and haughty, and I would have a big, gigantic head that wouldn't fit through my doorway when I came home. I can present to you my truth, my sense of truth, right? And yours might be different, and I'm going to talk about that, about how we can have different truths and how there are different levels of truth. And my hope today is just to give you some things to think about as you examine your beliefs and your truths and the things that people are telling you are true, and even how we measure truth and that sort of thing. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it, and I have a special place in my heart for, well, all of you, but especially people who I love to see people tuning in, listening from all over the world. I'm in the East Coast of the United States, and I know I have listeners all over the United States and Canada and Mexico, so North America. But there are lots of you in Europe and Asia and even Africa and the Middle East and South America and everywhere. So welcome. I love that. I love that I can talk to you. And if you ever want to talk back, you can contact me through my website. I love to hear from people who have listened to the podcast. Even if you want to tune in and say, I completely disagree with you, and that's totally fine. Totally fine. I'm not going to I'm not going to be angry at people for disagreeing with me. And that's an important point when I'm talking about truth, right? So we live in a world, and we have a history of, with humanity, and we're still going on with this, where we're willing to go to war and kill people for differences in belief, right? Think about, the Crusades, or people who are forcibly converted to different religions, or places where, the same people, but who have different religions, fight, sometimes to the death, sometimes civil wars, sometimes wars between countries. I fully recognize that, my own family history is, I come from a northern/Western European heritage, and, my ancestors for many generations were Christian, but before that, they were converted at the point of a sword, right? It was convert or die for them. And that has led to generations of my family being Christian. It's not to say that Christianity is bad or wrong or evil. It's just that, there were people willing to kill other people to force them to believe their truths. And I think we all recognize I hope, we all recognize how messed up that is, even though it still occurs. And it's a way, it's a form of tribalism. It's a form of othering. Those are other people. They are not deserving of the same human compassion as the people who attend church in the same place I do, or go to temple, or go to the mosque, or go to whatever. Or people who don't believe, right? Because, certainly religion has been wiped out in some places as well, religion or belief. And I'm not here to talk too much about religion other than that perspective that, just the perspective that people are willing to kill and be killed to protect their sense of the truth. And, I just want to go on record as saying that is absolutely ridiculous. And don't get me wrong, there are many, many people. In fact, I think most of the people on the planet are fully comfortable with people of different beliefs, people of different truths. I think that's the majority of the people on the planet, to be honest. I think we are, yes, there are newsworthy events and massacres and horrible things that people do to each other. I see, historically, it may not look like it because we're exposed to horrific news every day and we have access to the internet and 24-hour news and everything, but we are actually living in one of the most peaceful epochs in human history. It may not seem that way, but that is, that's something that is true from and I'm going to talk about different ways of measuring truth, but that is something that is objectively scientifically true. Even though it may not seem like it, because, when you turn on the news, all we talk about is strife, right? And let me be an advocate for every once in a while, if you are a person who watches and reads the news and, reads online, doing a news fast every so often. In a way, we get sort of addicted to this horrible information that's coming across sometimes. News companies, at least in the US and definitely around the world, they recognize this. And, the ones that are for profit, they know that they can be more profitable by stirring up emotion, and that includes negative emotion. And we can get just as addicted to negative emotion as we can to positive emotion. We can be addicted to outrage and horror and all of these things. I know I won't I won't mention anybody, but I know somebody who, during a particularly trying time in the United States political climate, was constantly watching the news, like nonstop when this person wasn't working. And, when this person wound up with, blood pressure and heart issues. And, I was just like, you've got to take a break. I get it. I get that, that you're getting sucked into the outrage of the day. And, there's a pressure to feel informed. But how informed are we? So anyway, we're living in a peaceful epoch, and I think people are becoming more tolerant. There is lots of intolerance. We have got eons to go before we can be, before we can declare ourselves tolerant at all. But we've made strides. We have made big strides. We've made big strides in human rights in the world. There are still places where that, people want to live in middle-aged society where, torture and murder were okay, got to enforce the rules. And it is my personal opinion and judgment that that is not a way to create a better society. Maybe you have a difference of opinion, but I don't like that stuff. I don't like, there's enough suffering in the world without us creating extra suffering. So let's talk about truth. Let's talk about spiritual truth. And as always, I'm going to define, what I mean when I say this, and when I introduce a term, I will give you my definition. And I've said this over and over, and I will continue to say it because I'm not here to cause an argument. My definition is my definition. Yours might differ. But I tell you what I mean simply so that you can understand what I'm talking about. So I'm not using words in a way that may be unique to me. They may be completely unique to me. We may not agree on my definition of a word, but you'll understand me better if you know what I'm talking, what I mean to say when I say it. Truth is a very complicated issue that is frequently made into something overly simplistic. And there's a lot of black and white thinking about what is true. So, at least in English, something is either true or it is false. We made fun of, there was a word invented recently. Don't know if it's made it into the dictionary, that something is truthy, is sort of true, right? And it was making fun of people who were just like making stuff up and, that was close to true, but not really, and it was used in political satire. So I'm not going to use the word truthy, but I'm going to talk about truth a little bit in different kinds of truth. So there is, there's a strong idea or value or belief that amongst many people that all truth is objective and measurable, and anything that isn't objective and measurable isn't true or can't really be true or doesn't exist or that sort of thing. So, that's a pretty extreme belief system, right? This material realism. If I can't measure it with a scientific instrument, it doesn't exist, period. Well, that is one way of measuring truth, for sure. Absolutely. Measuring things and that sort of thing. And, there are things, so, what that doesn't give us and what it discounts is it discounts subjective experience as not being true. And I would argue that that is a false argument. We cannot measure consciousness. We have no idea out of what? I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to say this. We have no idea how consciousness arises from a material scientific perspective, and there are lots of people who are trying to, figure out the chemicals and neural pathways. And honestly, how are you going to take a bunch of electrical signals that are passing through wires, which is essentially reducing consciousness to the brain, the physical brain, and have that equate to a subjective experience of consciousness? How are you going to sit there and listen to a symphony and, be moved by that and experience that and, explain that away with, these nerves fired? I I don't think that's going to happen, really, to be honest. Yes, we know that if, we affect the brain in certain ways, consciousness, it can be affected or can go away. My belief is that the brain is a receiver of consciousness, much like a radio receiver, but that consciousness is everywhere and it rises in everything, and that's my truth. So, I was recently listening to a Q&A by author Jason Miller. I recommend his stuff if you're into occult practices at all. He writes on what he calls sorcery, and he has a background in Tibetan Buddhism and classical, I would say sort of classical Greek magic and, for lack of a better term, sorcery, as well as hoodoo, which is American folk magic, and probably a background in lots and lots and lots of other things. He's quite an expert in many different areas of the occult and magic and spirituality and that sort of thing. So I recommend him. If you're into that sort of thing, he's got lots of books you can find on Amazon or at your local bookseller. And I think he's coming out with more, but I was listening to a Q&A with him, and he was talking about truth and, how things sort of lie. And he put it in terms, and I don't know that he invented this way of putting it, but, he's the first person I heard put it this way. But he talks about the head, the heart, and the hand, right? And their different concerns. So, truth at the level of the head is about facts. It's about right and wrong. It's about what things are. It's science-based. It's about definitions. So when I tell you, I'm going to define a term for you, I am speaking hopefully to the head part of you, right? And I do try, I don't know if it's apparent, but I do try to speak to, to you as a listener at different levels. I try to give you information. I try to provide some way of exploring meaning, and I try to give you something that might be useful. So the head is, thought and science and... Pardon me, I just knocked my microphone out of place. As you may know, I don't really edit these things, so if I burp or cough or hiccup or knock my microphone out of place, I don't usually stop the recording. So, the head truth is all about facts and science, and, that thing I was talking about, objective measurement, what things can be empirically measured. The temperature of the water is, 20 degrees Celsius, right? Something that can be measured, or a fact, it is night or it is day. Okay. So that is sort of head truth. And so with head truth, there's often, there is discussion, there can be disagreement, but usually you can come to a consensus. There's, what we call consensus reality, consensus truth. You and I agree to a certain level of truth. So then there's truth at the level of the heart. And this is not empirical truth. The heart is about emotion. It's about feeling. It's about meaning. It's about value, emotion, and it diverges from head truth, right? So I can say my relationship with my children is important to me. And that is my truth. Can you measure that scientifically in any meaningful way? No, you cannot. And yes, you might be a social scientist who ascribes some, who develops some way of measuring the importance of a relationship. but it will not capture my experience of my relationship with my children being important to me. You might capture some tiny aspect of that. You might measure that. How much time do I spend with my children? How much priority do I place on spending time with them over other things or, whatever? But you won't capture that meaning. But that's not to say that meaning isn't true. That meaning, is true. And this is where spirit starts to flourish a little bit, where spirituality starts to flourish, right? Where, when I meditate, for example, you might do some head measurement of that. You might say, oh, your blood pressure has reduced, your brainwaves have synchronized. Your respiration rate and your CO2 levels, change. And yeah, you can objectively measure some of what's going on with me physically, maybe even mentally, if you give me a questionnaire about my emotional state before and after meditation. Right. So empirically, you can measure some of the effects of meditation, and this has been done in study after study after study. And that's good stuff to know. It's good to know that meditation is healthy for the body. But from my heart level, I know that when I meditate, I feel better. I feel more in touch with the universe. I have an experience that is sometimes transcendental. And, that is not something that can be measured in any meaningful way. Yes, I know that there are, systems of Buddhism, for example, that have levels of nirvana and all of those things. And, I'm not going to argue with those. I think those are, somewhat subjective. And, maybe there's some ways to measure that. So maybe there's a head way of measuring that. But can you really describe the, measure the experience of enlightenment, the experience of touching infinity, the experience of touching the divinity that is within you, the infinite divinity that you are connected to and connected to all things? No. But does it make it not true? Does it make it not true that I cannot measure with scientific instrumentation my experience of the divinity within me? In my opinion, it does not make that not true. And people who are, materialistic realists might try to describe it away with, oh, your brain chemistry is doing this, and your brain waves are doing this, and your, breathing rate is doing this, and, sure, absolutely. But does any of that describe my experience? It does not. We can put all kinds of words around it. We can put all kinds of study around it. You cannot capture that. And I would even argue that words are not capable of describing truly transcendental experiences. If you've ever had one, you will know in your heart that is true. Somebody ever goes, what's it like? I'm always at a loss of words. I had this really, amazing, miraculous spiritual experience, and someone's like, oh, what did you experience? I almost can't describe it. My description can only touch the edges of that. Was my experience true? Of course it was. All of your experiences are true. My interpretation of them might not be considered truth by some people. Oh, I am, I've reached the ultimate level of enlightenment. I have ascended to 12th degree master of angel laser technology, whatever. We love systems and we love putting degrees on things. It's a very patriarchal Western way of thinking about things. And again, if that's the way you think about things, I'm not going to necessarily argue with it, although my position is very different. And I come from a background of martial arts. I trained in martial arts since I was a child, and I still to this day, on occasion, teach martial arts and that sort of thing. And at least in the West, in the United States, and I trained in Japanese martial arts, where colored belts became a thing, and that never used to be a thing. Right? Like back in the olden days, you got a white belt and you tied it around your waist and it turned black over time because you never washed your belt. Right? There wasn't in the 1600s in Japan, you didn't go to a dojo and earn your yellow belt and then your blue belt and then your green belt and then your brown belt. That didn't happen. But in the West, we have all these levels of belts and stripes, and we call people grandmaster and all of these things. There are all these levels, and I have participated in those systems. I was really excited when I got my first degree black belt, and very excited when I got my third degree black belt and got my teaching license, and all of those things. And it, in my school, it did mean that you had been it was sort of subjective. My teacher was sort of like, okay, you look like you have the right level of knowledge and skill and training and being and that sort of thing. And it took years and years and years. It was a much more traditional school than some other places. Where we have divided things, and I'm not arguing good or bad around this, but we're very much into dividing things into levels and degrees. We have bachelor's, master's, PhD. We've got, white belt to black belt. And then other martial arts started doing the same thing. And, there are rankings and these are modern things. It used to be, in many countries that have martial arts traditions, you just trained. You were either a teacher or a student. And you just trained to get better. It wasn't about achieving X level. And there wasn't really an objective way of measuring that. And then, there came to be these like black belt factories where you could get a black belt in a couple of years, or you have, 7-year-old black belts. It took me more than 7 years to get my first black belt. So I don't get it. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But it means it means to some degree you have dedicated a certain amount to teaching or whatever. But I digress. So we are very into placing things on levels, and even when we and again, this is not to say any of that is wrong. I'm talking about truth. It's a different type of truth, right? When we look at visible light and we look at the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see, we call some things blue and we call some things red and we call some things green and we call some things yellow, right? To certain degrees. Is there disagreement about where blue becomes green? Is this a greenish blue or is it a bluish green? Sure, because these are subjective measures. But if you don't stop at a green light, you can objectively get a traffic ticket. Or you don't stop at green lights. If you don't stop at a red light, you can objectively get a traffic ticket from a police officer. Almost any place in the world, I would imagine. So the difference there is important, and that is more of a head difference. Red light means stop. This means this. This is a fact. That red light is a signal for stop. It's a definition of something. It is a signal, like a word, right? Like we have, like the word dog means, a canine animal. But what if I call somebody a dirty dog? Am I literally thinking of them as a canine, or am I using that as an insult? So again, definitions of things vary, but red light is, that's a signal. That's a head truth. So, that's something that can be, it's very objective. It's very truth-based, that sort of thing. So far we have the head and the heart, and the third level is the hand. And again, I hope that when I talk to you in these podcasts that I speak to each level of truth for you in every podcast. I try to be conscious of that. So I talk about definitions of things. I talk about histories of things. I talk about, that sort of thing. That's very head truth. And I have a scientific background, even though I am, I practice shamanism and have a very healthy spiritual practice, but I come from a scientific background, and I've got an advanced degree in computer science, and so and I've studied statistics and research methods and all kinds of stuff, but I recognize that there are these different levels of truth, right? So I talked about head truth, the scientific stuff, the empirical stuff, right or wrong, definitions. I talked about the heart stuff, which is about meaning and value and emotion. Sometimes can diverge from fact, not necessarily empirical truth. And then there is hand truth, and this is what is useful, right? What things are useful. And this is sometimes seen as, and again, we like to put things on level. This is sometimes seen as the lowest level of truth. I don't think things are low to high levels of truth, right? What is useful and what is not. What's useful can be a very significant, important level of truth. So let me give you some examples of that, right? So placebo effect, right? If you give people who are sick a sugar pill with no known medicinal value, some certain percentage of them will get well, and that percentage of them will, is higher than the percentage with no treatment whatsoever. And, we don't 100% know why that is. And some research shows that even when people know they're being given a placebo, it still has an effect above random chance. So what the heck is going on? I don't know. But are placebos useful? Sure. And so one might argue that placebo effect is responsible for some level of spiritual healing, whether that's energy healing or shamanic healing or what have you. And that might be true. I don't know. And I don't know how you would measure that. However, does it really matter? Does it really matter if you go to a Reiki practitioner? And I honestly don't believe that it's 100% placebo effect. I do not. I think that there's healing, like if you go to an energy healer like a Reiki practitioner, or you go to a soul healer like a shamanic practitioner, there is stuff going on that's not just placebo effect, I believe. But are these things useful? Do people get better? Do they feel well? In my experience, yes. I've had, I see clients, and when I do healing sessions with them, the effect can be profound sometimes. And I have seen profound effects with other practitioners. I've experienced profound effects when I have had practitioners work with me. So is it useful? Can I do this and have an intended result? Absolutely. And so is the hand level of truth an important measure of truth? I think it is. That is a heart-based truth, right? That's a value. That usefulness is important. There's a aphorism or a principle of the sort of the modern teachings of Huna, a Hawaiian-based spiritual system. And I don't know if this is, I don't know if this is made up or not. I have no idea if this is a modern invention, but the saying is, effectiveness is the measure of truth. So if what you do works, then it's true. Then it is, it's true, it's useful, right? It's a hand truth, as opposed to maybe a head truth. I can't explain this scientifically, but it worked. I, waved a chicken feather over a bonfire at midnight on the waning moon and incanted, some Latin spell, and, the next day, a check arrived in the mail for some amount of money. That was unexpected. Did it work? Was that random chance? I don't know, but I might try. If that happened, I might try that again. Right. And so it doesn't honestly matter that much if something is placebo or coincidental. And quite frankly, I don't believe that much in coincidence. I do a lot of work with omens and have so much experience with specific things happening in synchronicity with other events that make them predictable in ways that there aren't connections. I don't know how to describe it better than that. I'm sorry. I realized that was probably really awkward. So again, I'm trying to explain using head truth. I'm trying to explain a hand truth, a usefulness truth, right? In shamanism, we do a lot of work with omens. We see certain things happening, repeated patterns of things happening. In the psychoanalyst Carl Jung recognized this and called it a synchronicity, right? When things coincided, they weren't necessarily random events, particularly when they coincide a lot. And weren't necessarily, and I fully believe that everything in the universe is connected to everything else. Everyone is connected to everyone else. And so things move in waves and patterns and vibrations, and being able to read those. But again, it's hard to measure that sort of scientifically. It's hard to, but it can be a hand truth. Right. And quite honestly, our ancestors, it doesn't matter where you're from, if you go back far enough, if our ancestors didn't read omens well, we would not have survived as a species, because human beings don't have, we don't have, natural defenses against things. We don't have incredibly sharp teeth or claws. We're not good at running or climbing, So we had to do things like build tools and learn how to hunt. And, there were shamans in these cultures who could, read the signs and tell people where to hunt or where to gather water or when to plant crops when that became a thing. And, that was a hand truth skill. If you weren't good at that, your tribe might have died out. Your people wouldn't be here. Your ancestors wouldn't exist. And that, maybe that happened. And so what I believe is that all of us, and again, this is a belief, this is a heart truth for me. All of us are the product of generations and generations and generations of people who had connection to spirit, connection to the natural world. We're able to read omens. We're able to, work directly with spirit to feed their tribe and heal their tribe and learn which plants were medicinal and which ones were poisonous and all of those things, and work with spirits of animals and spirits of nature and gods and goddesses and all of that. That's my belief, and I don't think so. My head truth is that if that were not the case, we probably as a species wouldn't still be here. And so, I say on my website, shamanism is your birthright, right? Whether you want to learn shamanism or get shamanic healing, it doesn't matter where you came from. There are shamanic cultures in your past. There's shamanic cultures in your ancestry. That is true everywhere we look and at every time throughout history. Up until, very recent human history, when we moved away from sort of shamanic tribal societies into, quote unquote civilization. And even then, in some cultures, shamanic practice continues to this day. And I practice shamanism in this culture. So that is, sort of head, heart, and hand, 3 H's, I guess, truths. Now, what about when truths differ? Right? What about if your truth is not my truth? You think that, you worship a God I've never heard of before, and you think that's the one true God, or, what have you, and I worship multiple gods, or I worship a different named God, or something along those lines. And how could we both be right? One of us has to be wrong. I think in cases like that, where people are wrong is where they think they can't be wrong, where there is absolutely no question or flexibility or belief that there can be more than one form of truth. I think that instantly makes you wrong, because the world is going to teach you a whole different bunch of stuff, and you can ignore it. You can use confirmation bias to cram it, look for evidence of that your beliefs are true and all that stuff. There are lots of people who are interested in what we call biblical archaeology, right? In objectively proving that the things written about in the Bible happened exactly as they were written 6,000 years ago. And there are people who believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old and all of these things. Personally, I don't understand why that's important to them. Why the Bible, the religious doctrine, which is about really heart and hand spiritual belief, has to be a historic document. And we know from the head learning, from head perspective, that a lot of the stories in the Bible didn't originate there. They came from Sumeria and Babylon and all of these places, and they were different, maybe slightly, maybe significantly different before they were written into the Bible. And maybe and I'm sorry if I'm trampling on your religious beliefs, but my understanding, and I don't identify as a Christian, although I was raised in Christianity and am immersed in very Christian culture here where I live. I just think reading it as objective historical truth like that causes a lot of strife. It's a lot of wasted effort because you're missing the actual lessons, which, by the way, if you are Christian, are about loving everyone. So if you are a Christian and you think your religion teaches you to hate others or judge others, I will take exception to that. Maybe that's your truth, but that ain't in there. And you really got to twist things around to hate people. You really do. And I don't mean to single out Christians, because I just like that is the mainstream religion that I know the best, because I was raised Christian. I went to Christian Sunday school and Christian church when I got older, and I stopped identifying as Christian sometime in my 20s when that no longer worked for me, and I didn't like some of the ways that some people had twisted. But there are beautiful things in Christianity. There are beautiful teachings. There are beautiful practices. There are wonderful things. And there is magic and mysticism there too. It's just really flipping hidden. And I don't like the televangelist thing. Not that they represent all Christians, but they represent a big amount. And I don't like it when they get mixed in with politics. Your values should be reflected in your politics, but there's just too much of that. Whatever. I'm not going to go down that path too much. And if what I say offended you, sorry, I guess. I'm expressing my truth, and I am not at all bashing Christianity as a whole, as a thing. And I realize that there are 14,000 recognized Christian sects in the world, and they don't all practice or believe in the same things. Yes, there are commonalities. They don't even read the same versions of the Bible, however. And not all of them celebrate Easter and Christmas, or celebrate them on the same days, or, all of those things. So it's fine. I can't paint everybody with a broad brush, and I don't have hatred for anybody. I do not. I think when I see, when I look around and I see expressions of hatred couched in something that should be about love, it does bother me. And I recognize that's my own thing, but it does bother me, and I'm not gonna. I will not hide that. So if you are not loving to everyone, I'm not particularly interested in your beliefs. I'm not, because you got to get there first, And there are lots and lots and lots of Christians I know and love who are loving towards everyone, and that's fantastic. That's part of that system that I love and adore. And I do my best to love everyone, even if they are, hateful. I do my best to love everyone, because I think that's important. I may not like what you do, but I love you as a person, because you are a person and you are divine, and you are, you are connected to me. And if I don't love you, I'm not loving part of myself. So anyway, I digress a lot. I realize that. I go on these tangents talking about things, but it's okay. But we're talking about truth. So, in the in Huna, there is this principle that truth is the the effectiveness is a measure of truth. And there's also a saying from there that says that all truth is not found in the same school, meaning that they actually recognize that different viewpoints can also be truthful, right? Whatever that means. Different viewpoints can be effective, and I liken it to you go to a doctor, you're sick or something, and you get an opinion, and sometimes you can go with treating whatever you have medically, and sometimes you can go with treating whatever you have surgically. And sometimes either one would be just as effective. And which one would work is really a matter of opinion. And you follow the opinion of hopefully the doctor who has the most expertise. You get consults, they look at it. And they don't always agree, but either way could potentially be effective for the same thing, right? You could treat the same thing in two different ways, and it would work. And so each one would be useful, and each one would be a true way of treating some dis-ease. And so that, that's an example of, two schools that can both be right, that can both have the same truth. I think I may be about to misquote something, and I may be giving the wrong credit. So feel free. I should have looked this up before I did the podcast, but I just thought of this quote, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, if I am wrong in my head level of truth. I think it was Niels Bohr, the physicist. And interestingly enough, like a lot of these, quantum physics guys, became much more spiritually oriented as they really started to plumb the depths of of scientific reality. Like those things start to come together, right? Where if you observe particles, they start to act differently. Well, that's weird. That's really weird. How does that happen? How does my consciousness or the measurement of particles affect their behavior? Right? And you can, it's a famous experiment, but you can look at the, I think it's called the double slit experiment, where they, fire a light beam through two slits, and if they measure it a certain way, it behaves as particles, photons, and if they measure another way, it behaves as waves. How does that work? I don't know. Observer effect, the act of being conscious of something, of observing something, changes it at a physical level. So anyway, I think it was Niels Bohr who said, "The opposite of a profound truth may very well be another profound truth." So that's saying something for somebody who is heavily into the mathematic aspect of science. And again, I might be misquoting slightly, but the thought holds, and I might be attributing it to the wrong physicist. But and feel free to look it up if that's really important to you. But that was said by a very famous physicist, and so these this area of science starts to get into when we start to get into these weird quantum effects where teleportation happens, and observing things changes them, and particles pop into and out of existence from nothing. That happens, and we can observe that in a lab and measure it. That's some, we're starting to get to some pretty spiritual levels of science there. Starting to. Think about what we might discover in the next 1,000 years of human science. Think about where we were 1,000 years ago. right? We were, Iron Age 1,000 years ago. And now we have space travel and lasers and the internet and podcasts and toasters and houses. And technology is accelerating. Think what we will learn in the next, if we survive as a species, if we don't stop destroying the planet, which is our source of life, think about what we will learn scientifically in the next 1,000 years. And how much super advanced science has moved in a direction that is very close to what the spiritually advanced teachings have been talking about for ages and ages and ages. I wish I could remember the name of the book at this point. I believe it's on Amazon, but a colleague of my main shamanic teacher did PhD research on shamanic healing and used quantum EEGs to measure what's going on, and can prove that there's non-local phenomena happening during shamanic healing. That's pretty crazy. How does that work? We don't know yet. We can say, it's spirit. From a head truth level, that's really hard to measure. So as I come kind of to a close of this particular episode of the podcast, I talked about how I always try to give you head, heart, and hand stuff in these podcasts. I did a lot of head talking today, a little bit of heart, and I talked about the hand, but I didn't give you anything that was necessarily too useful from a practical perspective. But what I would encourage you to do is to examine, take some time. It doesn't matter, 5 minutes, 10 years, doesn't matter. And start to examine your beliefs. And your beliefs are anything that you hold to be true. And here's where this gets a little sticky, right? So that includes things that can be scientifically measured, right? So I believe that, I believe that 1 + 1 = 2. Now, that might be empirically, scientifically, objectively provable. But the fact that I hold that as a truth, because I might believe that 1 + 1 = 3, which could be scientifically, empirically wrong, but it's a belief that I hold. So even if my beliefs are measurably true, it is anything that I hold to be true is a belief. The act of holding something to be true is belief. And I've had this argument with atheists. I have nothing against atheists if that's what if that's your thing. And they will tell me that atheism is not a belief. It is the absence of belief. And that doesn't hold water with me, because absence of belief is a complete absence of knowledge. If I had never heard of deity or God or gods and goddesses or what have you, I would not hold any belief, necessarily hold any belief about that, unless I'd encountered that some other way, right? So if I'd never encountered it, I would hold no belief. I would hold nothing as true. But, if you're an atheist, you hold the belief that there is no deity, there's no God. And they will tell you, nope, that is objective truth. And my point is, even if that is objective truth, even if that is somehow empirically provable, the fact that you think it's true is still a belief. That's it. The belief is just the thought that it's true, that something is true, whether it is or isn't, regardless of its actual nature. So a really interesting thing to do that creates a whole lot of flexibility for people is to just run thought experiments around your beliefs, like experiment with them. This is not to say you have to change anything you believe in. It's not, I'm not necessarily trying to change core beliefs. I believe I'm a good person. I'm not trying to change that. But you can run thought experiments, and I have found this incredibly useful, where I take something that I hold as true, and I ask myself the question, what if I believed something different? What if? How would that change things for me? I believe the sun will come up tomorrow. What if I didn't believe that? Or what if I believed that I needed to perform some ritual every day to make sure the sun arose tomorrow, as some of our ancestors did? Or what if I believed the sun was an illusion? Or what if I believed, the earth was flat and the sun rotated around the earth, or, what have you? Even though I don't actually believe a lot of, those things, how would that change other beliefs? And so I play with that sometimes. I play with having a flexible belief system. Having a flexible belief system can give you a leg up. It can make you more adaptable, right? What if that weren't true? Or what if you believed something different? What if I believed my name was something different? What if my name wasn't John Moore, right? What if it was Harry Schwartz? I don't know. How would that change things? Well, would change my driver's license probably. I'd probably think my driver's license wasn't mine, or the mail coming to my house was meant for somebody else. And I'm being a little funny here, but yeah, I mean, you can examine your beliefs, play with them a little bit. What if I believed something different? Or what if I didn't believe that? Or what if I believed that wasn't true? Or what if I held no belief, meaning I didn't actually know about this? Right? How would that change things for me? And you can, from that, I think you can plumb a lot of really useful stuff, and sometimes, you don't have to do this with your core beliefs, right? You don't, if this can be super uncomfortable if you're talking about a core belief, like I believe I'm a good person. What if I weren't? What if I believed I was an evil person? That's an interesting thought experiment for me, but that might be psychologically hard for some people. But how would that change? How would it change my behavior if I, so I've never practiced, say, Judaism or Hinduism as a spiritual, as a religion or a spiritual practice. What if I did? What if I believed those things? And I'm not saying I don't believe that those are true for people or things or, whatever. I'm just saying, what if I changed so those were, how would that affect my life? How would that change things for me? How would it change my thought process? So this is just a little exercise, just so I can give you something useful to take out of this. And I think it's useful because it does allow us to do some self-inquiry. And it may even lead to, where does this belief come from? I don't know if this is still true, but I do know that 20 years or so ago, when they did research in the United States, that something like 70% of people in the United States belonged to the same religion that they grew up in, right? And so, we can assume from that, maybe, and that may be true or not, because it's an assumption. But we might believe that, our upbringing has a lot to do with our spiritual and religious belief system. And that's true, even if I've rejected the religion or system of spirituality that I was raised in, right? It had an influence. It affected me somehow. So, when I look at what I believe, and, I sort of like, play with that. What if I didn't believe that? And then I look at, well, where did this belief come from? And that sort of thing. It allows me some flexibility in the way that I look at things. And I find that that's incredibly useful, because sometimes it doesn't matter what you hold to be true. At some point in your life, something that you hold to be true, and I'm not saying it's necessarily spirituality, is going to be proven wrong, just because we're sometimes wrong about stuff, or it's not going to suit you anymore, or it's not going to work for you. And when we hold our beliefs with if I don't believe this, I'm going to die kind of thing, that's where fundamentalism and religious wars and that sort of thing comes in. And I haven't even really talked too much about cognitive biases, but, a big one is, we believe evidence that supports things that we already believe. We put stronger weight on evidence that supports things that we already believe. So if you believe that the Earth is flat, and you see pictures of the Earth from space and it looks round, you're going to disbelieve that, where somebody presenting some evidence that the Earth is, quote unquote, evidence that the Earth is flat. I've actually flown around the world completely, so I have firsthand knowledge that it is not flat. It is a ball. But you are going to potentially believe evidence. I can't believe that the people in this day and age still believe the Earth is flat and that it's some kind of conspiracy. But hey, what if I believed that? Well, I would have to disbelieve my own experience. Gosh, that's weird. Right. So, play around with that, and I hope that it's useful. And with that, I am over an hour, and I hope this has been useful and interesting. I am working on getting some more guests on my podcast soon, so that it's not just my voice that you have the pleasure of listening to each time, but that I can talk to people who have some interesting beliefs and viewpoints that they can bring in that aren't necessarily mine, but that's totally fine. We can entertain other people's stuff. And I think that helps us get along better in the world. So with that, I will say that I love you, and it doesn't matter who you are. If you are, listening to this or not listening to this, I love you because you are a person and you are deserving of more love, not less. I will talk to you next time. It has been my pleasure.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.